Okay, so before we can get to go and play and have some fun and create some wonderful images with our speed lights, we have to figure out how we're going to use them. Now, there are many ways to use a speed light. On camera? No. Off camera? Yes, that's how we're going to use it today. Now, personally, I like to use my flashes in manual mode because I find I get more creativity out of them. I get more creative with them just by putting the pressure on myself and using the flash for its full capacity. ETTL, TTL is also an option that you can use, and we'll talk about that a little later on. So, back to the flashes. There has to be a method by which you use your flash, certainly in the craziness of the wedding environment. So I've created my triangle of loveliness. Now, if you've seen the other flash DVD, you'll be well aware of this triangle, because there has to be a method by which you adopt and by which you use your flashes in this situation. In the middle of the triangle lives ISO. Now, ISO controls everything that we do as photographers. It controls our shutter speed, our aperture, it controls how much light we want it to get into the camera, the sensitivity of the camera depending on the situation that's around us. So don't be scared of changing your ISO. I'll change my ISO throughout a wedding day depending on the environment and the situation that I'm shooting in. So aperture lives on one corner of the triangle, and that controls how much flash we allow to hit the subject with. Yes, aperture controls depth of field, we know that, but in the off-camera flash world that I've created for myself, aperture controls how much flash we allow to hit the subject with. So remember that. Shutter speed lives on the other corner of the triangle. Now, shutter speed obviously controls the speed of the shutter. If we're photographing moving things, we go faster, slower, etc., etc. But in off-camera flash world as well, shutter speed controls our ambience. Now, how much ambience we allow to hit the camera, to get into the camera. So aperture controls how much flash we hit the subject with. Shutter speed controls how much ambience we allow to get into the camera. So we're either killing the ambience or we're keeping the ambience. Now, the third point of the triangle is flash to subject distance. And this is quite an important part of our off-camera flash usage, because if you're familiar with my flash work, it's quite dynamic, it can be quite strong, and that's the look I'm going for when I'm using a lot of flashes. So my flash to subject distance is quite important. I kind of like to have my flashes quite close to the subject. So often I can just look at a flash on a stand or being held by my assistant and see how far away it is from my subject and automatically know my aperture just by asking or having a look, seeing what power the flash is set on. And that's when I get used to learning what my flash to subject distance is. So the important thing to remember, I think anyway, that the key to mastering off-camera speed light flash, or any off-camera flash for that matter, is not really about the flash. The flash can kind of take care of itself. You've put them in the right position and use the right method, which hopefully you will do after this DVD. It's about controlling ambience. Now, the key to successful off-camera dynamic flash is about controlling the ambience. Don't forget that. At Christmas, when we do Christmas weddings, it's about the loveliness, the twinkliness of Christmas. We have to keep that loveliness in our camera. We have to not destroy and make it dark. We have to keep it light and fresh, and that's what we're doing. We're controlling the ambience by still applying the flash. In the summer, we get that magic hour of light in the night where we get that warmth, and we don't want to destroy that warmth. So even if we're adding flash to this situation, maybe a little bit of high-speed flash, then we're still keeping the ambient. So don't forget, it's about controlling the ambience to perfection, and then it's our position of the flash and using the correct apertures, correct shutter speeds and correct ISO that allow us to create that magic. Okay, just going to talk a little bit about ETTL. Now, ETTL, ITTL, TTL, it's called different things depending on which brand of flash that you use. There's nothing wrong with using the ETTL system of the camera. Basically, it will always try and balance the flash output against the ambient surroundings. It will try and work those settings out and give you the nicest, well, I think sometimes flattest flash output. But sometimes you haven't got the chance to figure out a manual exposure. You can always pop this on the camera or use an ETTL trigger or a lead and keep it in the ETTL system, and it will try and figure things out for you. Even in ETTL mode, you can still stop down or increase the power slightly to give you more of a softer look or a bit more of a harder edge. Now, even ETTL, if I was using it with ETTL, I'm still going to try and get it off the camera on a lead, like I said, or a trigger, and away from myself and at 45 degrees to the subject. That way it's going to try and nicely balance itself, like I said, against the ambient, and and almost give a nice fill-in flash. Personally, I like my flash used to be a little bit more dynamic, so that's why I personally use manual flash for that little bit of a hardened edge. So back to the triangle. Now, personally, I use Pocket Wizard Plus 2s and 3s, there are many different brands on the market, but I use manual triggers. I don't rely on the ETTL system, and I'll explain a little bit why that is later on. I like to get it right in camera. I like to see what I'm doing. If there's something going wrong, then I can fix it. And that's the way I think about manual flash, and that's the way you want to think when you're out shooting with your clients. Personally, I might have 10 minutes if I'm really lucky with the client, so I have to make the most of that. I will then try and grab them throughout the day, or maybe in the evening, certainly throughout the meal, to try and do a quick flash shot outside, as we'll talk about a little later on. Now, the thing about most manual triggers is that you can only use them at the flash shutter sync of your camera. That will probably range from 160th of a second to, if you're lucky, 3/20th of a second, but often it's around the 200th of a second mark. So you have to bear that in mind when thinking about this triangle. So let's paint a picture. Let's imagine a shot. So we get a bride and groom outside, and the sky is lovely and blue, and there's a car in the foreground, and we have some columns in the background, and we want to really underexpose that scene as much as we can to add a bit of drama to the set. So we have a speed light, and we have a trigger, and we have our camera with a wide angle lens, and that's all we've got. So what do we do? Well, we think about the triangle. Now, first of all, in the middle of that triangle, don't forget Liv's ISO. So I wouldn't walk into that scene or that situation on 400, 800 ISO. It's just not necessary. So I'm going to knock my ISO right down to desensitize the camera and desensitize the scene, to knock the light down, to give me a head start anyway. So I'm going to go to 50 ISO or 100 ISO. That's my starting point. So I'm then going to go to the speed light and see what the power setting is. Now, in that kind of sunny environment, I know I'm going to need every last drop of power this speed light has. So I'm going to put it on full power, and we're just going to leave it there for the time being. I go back to that triangle in my head. So if the top flash shutter speed sync is 250, because I'm using manual triggers, then I dial in 250. So far, we're at 50 or 100 ISO, and we're at 2/50th of a second. Now, the 2/50th of a second is what's controlling the sunshine in my background. It's what's controlling the sky. Now, if you look at the blue sky on a sunny day, you'd want to go faster than 2/50th, yes, but we can't, because we're limited to the shutter speed sync of our camera because of these triggers. Now, don't take that as a negative, I take that as a positive, because otherwise, how do we figure out the rest of the shot? Well, we do it because we do it with our aperture. Now, if I'm shooting the bride and groom, stood in that scene that I mentioned earlier, 2/50th of a second at 100 ISO, and I'm going to have a potluck guess at f11. And I'm going to dial f11 in, I'm going to put the speed light a reasonable distance to them, maybe 3-4 feet away from them, and we'll give it a test shot. I'll have a look at the camera and we'll see, okay, the sky doesn't look as blue as I want it to, and the couple look a little hot. The flash is quite close and it's kicking out a lot of power. The quick fix, we're on f11. Aperture controls how much flash hits the subject. We go from f11 to f13 or f16. Now what this is doing, it's not stopping the amount of power that's coming out of the flash, it's just stopping the amount of flash that's hitting the subject. But what it's also doing is allowing us to knock our ambient down. So the aperture is helping out the shutter speed. The shutter speed has already reached its limit. I can't change that corner of the triangle, but I can help the ambience drop by using my aperture. So I'm at 2/50th of a second, f16, okay, at 100 ISO, and I've got a full power speed light 3-4 feet from the subject. I have another test shot, boom, happy days, we got the shot. Okay, so let's look at another scenario that we can figure out and using the triangle in our head. Let's think of a group shot, Christmas or on holiday, and the wedding is inside. Let's say you can't get outside because it's raining. Let's say it's Christmas and there's a big Christmas tree behind, and that's where you've been asked to do your group shots or your bridal party shots or your family shots. So let's paint the situation. We have a group of people stood in front of the Christmas tree. Let's have 6 people stood in front of a Christmas tree, and it's all about Christmas. We cannot go and make Christmas dark. We have to keep it lovely and sparkly. So that really is the main thing in my head. Yes, this triangle is really important. The shot has to be important. If you can't create the shot in your creative side of your mind, then the technical aspect can't kick in. So always look for the shot first, and then use this triangle to help you secure that shot. Okay, so we've got the group of people in front of the Christmas tree. It's all about the Christmas tree. So we go back to the middle of the triangle, ISO. So instead of using 50 or 100, like on the bright scene, we obviously, as a photographer, you will know this, and we have to use a higher ISO to allow more light to come into the camera from the Christmas tree. So we're increasing sensitivity. So I want to go to 400. Now, if I start at 400, I've got some room to go up and I've got some room to go down. If you start at your limit, or what you think your limit of your camera is, you've got nowhere to go. So start at 400 in that kind of scene. I might end up at 640, but certainly no higher than 800. So I'm setting the ISO. As a guess, I'm going for 400. And I've got my 6 people in a line in front of the Christmas tree, and I've got one speed light level with me, let's say a 2470 distance away from that group. So I'm 6-7 feet away from the group. And I'm using one speed light to light the group. Now, to give myself a bit more of a softer light, I've popped the speed light into a Light Easy Box, which is going to give me a nice spread across the group, so I'm not getting any hot spot, and it's going to mean that I can shoot up to 6, 8, 10 people from one little flash like that, sometimes even more. So we're already at 400 ISO. I go to the speed light and I think, okay, I'm going to put it 6-7 feet away from the group. As a group shot, what should you be thinking as a photographer? Well, you should be thinking, I need a little bit of depth of field. So if it's a staggered group shot, you're going to have to shoot out on f8. If everyone's on the same focal plane, you might want to shoot it on 5.6. So the shot determines then the aperture that you have to choose, and then you have to power the flash accordingly. Group shots are the only situation where that happens, otherwise it's the other way around. We can choose whatever aperture we want. Group shots generally determine the aperture that we have to use, because I wouldn't go shooting a group shot like that on 1.2. So we're at 400 ISO, we've got a quarter power, let's say we put it on quarter power speed light, 6 feet away from the group, in a Light Easy Box, and I'm shooting the group on 5.6. Now, I have a quick test shot to make, I'll do that in a second, and I've got to figure out my shutter speed. Now, the shutter speed bit is quite easy really. All it's taken care of is the Christmas tree, is the ambient that's coming from the Christmas tree. So I'm going to dial in a 60th and I'm going to do a quick test shot. Now, the scene that I look at, and I say to the group, guys, just a quick test. I look at the back of my camera. They look a little hot, okay? And the background looks a little dark. So we think, right, okay, what can we do? So aperture controls how much flash hits the subject. If I'm on 5.6, well, I can go to 6.3 or f8. Just close down the amount of light that's hitting them. I do another test. I have a quick look. The group now looks really good. The background still looks dark. What can I do? I can slow down my shutter. So I go from a 60th to a 50th or a 40th. And that's how we fix it. So we look at every element of the shot, and then we go to one corner of the triangle and we change it. And believe me, this is hard to do in the beginning, but once it makes sense, once that light bulb moment clicks on in your head, it will revolutionize the way that you use off-camera flash, because you are in full control. Now, if you look at that same scene and the subjects are dark, and the Christmas tree is dark, then my quick fix is to go back to the middle of the triangle and change my ISO. So I just increase it. Boom, done, carry on. If I look at the back of the camera and they're too bright and the background's too bright, so instead of going through the whole process again, I just drop my ISO. So I'm desensitizing the camera. I'm not touching my aperture or my shutter speed. I'm just allowing less light to hit from the flash and less ambient to come through, and it looks great. But the most important thing is that you remain in control with this method. It's a fantastic way to use off-camera flash. More reliable than ETTL and TTL systems. They will get you out of a quick fix, yes, for sure. But I want a certain look. I like my files to have a certain dynamic look to them, a very specular, shadowy look, and that's the way I love it to look. So always go back to this triangle, keep it in your brain, draw it out on a little piece of paper if you want to, and use it as a reference point to get you out of that situation. Take a look at the back of your camera, just relax, breathe. If you're stuck in a situation, just go and mess with the client's tie, go back to your bag, change your cards, just give yourself a couple of seconds to figure it out. The key to all this is controlling the ambience. Do we want the ambience or do we not want the ambience? That's what you have to remember in your head. The most important part of all this, and certainly something that I've spoke about throughout all of my DVDs, is that you have to be creative. Create the image first in your brain and then use these techniques to execute it. But I guarantee it will change the way that you use off-camera flash forever. So throughout this DVD, we're going to use flash, off-camera flash that is, in 2 different ways. Now you're going to be plenty of daylight stuff for you to look at as well, but we're going to use off-camera speed lights just our luck that we chose the sunniest day known to mankind. Not a bad thing, because it teaches you how to control the ambience just with the small powers or the small relative powers of a speed light. So we're going to talk about that first, using high-speed flash. Now, high-speed flash is something that is quite tricky to use in a wedding environment because of the craziness. You might not have too much time to figure it out. But I really like to use it, and I use it a lot in all the stuff that I shoot, whether it's commercial, fashion, or certainly for kids' lifestyle stuff and babies. It works really well. So we use high-speed flash in this kind of situation when we want to isolate the subject from the background, thus minimum depth of field, but we want to pop a little bit of flash in to give that creative edge to the face. That's when we'd use high-speed flash in a sunny environment. Okay, so let's think of a scene. So we have a bride sitting on some steps, and it's very, very bright and sunny, and her white dress is very, very bright. Okay, 250th f22 might be the way to go, but we might not have the power to control that. We might not have enough power with a speed light to bring down the highlights of her dress. So the other way to do it is to go high speed. Now, on the back of most Canon flashes anyway, there's a little lightning symbol, and you just hit that or keep your finger on it for a couple of seconds, and then they'll come up in the back of your camera, and that means it's set to high speed. On the Nikon system, you have to make sure the Auto FP 320S in the menu system, which is the pencil. That's how technical I am with the Nikon system, but it's the pencil E, and then go to Auto FP 320S at the top and make sure that's turned on if it's there. Okay, and that will then read to your speed light and allow you to use relative high-speed flash. So let's go back to this scene now, where the bride stood on the steps. Now, if I had a Ranger or a very strong, powerful light with my disposal, I could quickly just pop it onto f22, full power on the Ranger, boom, get on with the next thing. We don't have the full potential of that kind of power with speed light, so we have to kind of think about it a little bit of a different way. Doesn't mean we can't do it. We just have to execute it differently. So we got the high-speed flash away from us and as close to the subject that we can get it. Now, if all else fails and all you can do is put it on your camera, that's what you're going to have to do. I'm not a particular fan of on-camera flash because I find it makes the subject look too flat. I'm wanting to bring some shadow into the face of the subject, and that's why we get the flash off to an angle to the subject. Now, high speed, we can use high-speed triggers. Photics make a nice set, Calumet make a set. Pocket Wizard, of course, have the flexes. There's many different high-speed triggers, but they will allow you to take your shutter speed over the flash shutter sync of your camera and take it pretty much to whatever you want, up to 8,000 if you can go that far. We also use high-speed off-camera leads made by Elastilite, and they come in different lengths, and then they retain full high-speed capability as well as ETTL and TTL if you want that as well. So that might be a good option just even to practice with. So the bride's still waiting very patiently on the steps while we figure out this setting. And we look at the scene. Now we look at the sky, at the ambience around her, and we look at, more importantly, her dress being hit by this sun or being potentially side lit by the sun. Shutter speed. We can still use a little bit of the triangle for this. Okay, so shutter speed controls our ambient. Okay. Now the thing I cannot change when using high-speed flash is my aperture. Why? Because we want to isolate the subject from the background, and that is done by using wide apertures, so that has to stay as a given. Makes it kind of easy to figure the rest out, really, to be honest, because if we can't change the aperture, we've got to do everything else with the ISO and the shutter speed. So it's not that difficult to do. So we put the camera flash either on a high-speed setting or on full power, and that's what the setting is on the back of the flash. And we have that at the suitable angle to the subject, also in a vertical orientation as well, as you'll see a little later on in the DVD. And I find that gives a bit of a better spread going down the dress. So, bride's just about to go in. We say, hang on a minute, and we get on with the shot. So we look at the ambient and we dial in 2,000th of a second as a test. We have a quick test. It's not too bad. We're getting some nice shallow depth of field with our aperture, has to stay on what it's on. But now the shutter speed is doing everything for us. It's controlling how much flash hits the subject. It's controlling how much ambient is left in the scene. So if we want to darken that scene a little bit, we speed up the shutter speed. Now some of the shots that we've done recently at weddings have been up in the 5, 6, 8,000ths of a second. You shoot in wide open 1.2 on a 50mm or 2.8 on a 24-70. It's a beautiful thing to get right. It's quite tricky to master, so I advise you to practice it beforehand, but the look means it's not as punchy and hard as an F11 or F13 flash can look. Although it still looks cool, it looks a little bit softer, a little bit more feminine, and the flash usage becomes just soft kicked in from the side, and it looks absolutely lovely. So practice it before you get there. So the other way we're going to use off-camera speed lights today is just using the shutter speed as our limit. Now that's the way I use all my flashes pretty much. High speed, yes, has its own, it has that softness, it has a kind of cool look to it, but so does kind of hard-hitting, dynamic, specular-looking flash, and that's the way we're going to show you today as well. Now bear in mind there are limits to speed lights, and we've pretty much overridden most of those today, to be honest. When I was using speed lights only as my light source, I might have to wait for that sun to go down a little bit. I might have to hide the sun behind the trees, or to look for a shady corner where I wasn't having to fight against the ambience with my flash. Again, high-speed flash, you can still override that now, but it takes a little bit more figuring out actually in the field. So we're going to use just regular flash, just using the incremental powers on the back of a speed light, 16th power, 8th power, quarter power, half power, full power. We're going to control how much of that power hits the subject with our apertures, while keeping in mind that we have a ceiling top limit of shutter speed. Now I find this way to use flash the best way there is, certainly in a wedding environment when the pressure is on. Once you've figured out the way this triangle works, most speed lights have enough power for you to be able to execute the shots that you want. So all we've got to play with is a manual speed light, a manual trigger, an easy box, a pole or a stand, and a whole lot of imagination. Now it's about time, let's go and play.